Hi, my name is Dr. Rayshawn Ray, aiming to speak truth to power, and this is my daily thought. Are the First and Second Amendments only for white people? Moreover, is freedom of speech, the ability to protest peacefully without violence, and the ability to bear arms only for whites? Because I think when we look at recent incidents, where if we just start with freedom of speech and the ability to protest peacefully, we see 49ers starting quarterback Colin Kaepernick, who has been protesting peacefully for weeks. And people and others have joined in. And people are in an outrage about his ability to do that. And the consequences have been grave, from him receiving death threats to little league football teams having their seasons suspended because either people didn't want to play against them or felt that what they were doing was disrespectful. But this is what's interesting. The First Amendment from the Bill of Rights established or actually ratified December 15, 1791, stated Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What's interesting about this when I hear this is that, for one, it was made in 1791. What we know about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, even the Bill of Rights, is that they've had to be ratified over time, partly because if we think about 1791, black people were still slaves. They couldn't vote. They didn't have citizenship. They were considered 3/5 of a human. And so even when we had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments following the Emancipation Proclamation and the abolishment of slavery in 1865, what we saw was that blacks still could not vote at that particular time. Their citizenship was still extremely fragile, and that 3/5 status simply continues. So when I see Colin Kaepernick protesting on the field and the responses he's received, it harkens back to the 50s and 60s, when African Americans would engage in sit-ins peacefully in restaurants, and some whites would join in with them in these particular incidents. And what we saw was the brutality that they would face by exercising their First Amendment. It makes me think about some quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. that I just find so powerful. As people still try to act like he was some sort of conservative or possibly not radical in the way that he actually was. MLK said, "Nonviolence is a powerful and just weapon, which cuts without wounding, and ennobles the man who wields it. It is a sword that heals. One has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws." Howard Zinn said, "Protest beyond the law is not a departure from democracy. It is absolutely essential to it." MLK also said, "An individual who breaks a law that consciously or conscientiously tells him is unjust, and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice, is in reality expressing the highest respect for the law." Yeah, I could pretty much go along with that. And so, history records that standing up for your rights may not require standing at all. In the case of individuals sitting down at a diner to protest the fact that blacks weren't allowed to patron certain establishments, and led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1965, on up to the present with Colin Kaepernick, who's protesting police brutality against African Americans. Which brings us to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, of course, is the right to bear arms, and it states, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." And so when I see this, I'm from Tennessee. People carry guns openly. I see tons of people, particularly white people, carrying guns openly, publicly, in various places. Starbucks, like what happened in Virginia, Walmart, car washes, actually holding the gun as if they're going to shoot it in public places. and nothing really happens. And then there are other times where whites are actually seeming as though they're going to shoot somebody, and either they're taken in peacefully or not killed. And it's clear that the police officers were trying to be patient and trying not to kill them in these moments. However, for blacks, there becomes a very different outcome. I mean, if we look at what happened in Charlotte, North Carolina, if we look at what happened in St. Paul, Minnesota, if we look at what happened in Ohio with Tamir Rice and John Crawford III, what we saw is that these are all open carry states. Or in the case of Minnesota, you at least have the right to carry a concealed weapon. And what we saw in these incidents was that the NRA didn't come to any of these people's defense. I mean, in this regard, Tamir Rice was 12 years old, walking around with a gun. Police killed him in less than 2 seconds. There was no way he even had the opportunity to comply with the police in that moment. Even though he was carrying a pellet gun, it wasn't even a real gun. John Crawford III in Ohio was walking around with a gun that was being sold in Walmart, that by all accounts either he was going to purchase or was walking around to see if he wanted to purchase it, all of which is legal. Someone said they saw a man walking around with a gun, police show up and shoot him dead. And in that incident, similar to Tamir Rice, there were large settlements paid out. Now, people always say, oh, well, a settlement doesn't mean guilt. It definitely doesn't mean innocence. I mean, anytime you pay people millions of dollars for a wrongful death suit, it suggests that they were wrongfully killed. And in this case, they were wrongfully killed by police officers. You have what happened in Charlotte, North Carolina. Man walking backwards. They said he had a gun. It was unclear if we saw a gun. We saw a gun later. The point is that he was given no sort of benefit that he had this gun, and that North Carolina is an open carry state. But on the other hand, we see several incidents where other people have the ability to carry guns openly and exercise their Second Amendment rights. And then even when people don't show a gun, like Philando Castile, who told the officers, that's what you're supposed to do. Hey, I have a weapon. And all of a sudden the officer shoots and kills him. George Zimmerman riding through Texas has a gun sitting on the other side, on the passenger side, like on the dash or on the seat or like by the glove compartment. And the officer says, oh yeah, this is George Zimmerman. As if this person hasn't already killed someone, as if we shouldn't necessarily take extra precautions. But see, that's what's interesting. Certain people are given the ability to exercise their First and Second Amendment rights, and other people are not. In the case of the boy who brought a very neat clock to school was perceived to be a terrorist. So we see how inanimate objects all of a sudden become weapons that people perceive, but for other people, they can actually have these weapons and everything is fine. So I pose the question to you again, as we think about the fact that blacks are more likely to be killed by the police whether they have a gun or not. Who really has the right to exercise their First and Second Amendment rights? And if these are some of the most fundamental rights we have, when people say, make America great again when? Are we going back 50 years when black people couldn't do any of these things? Are we going back even further, say 150 years when people were basically still slaves? How far are we going back? Are we going back close to 250 years when these documents were originally comprised, where blacks were considered 3/5 of a person? So really got to think, is that how much progress could be made in a span of 50 years when for 250 years people didn't have those rights? See, those numbers don't add up. You got to ask yourself that. So again, who really has the right to exercise their First Amendment rights? Conversations matter like Black Lives in Books, and I hope that this has sparked one.